So for this session, I really wanted to dig into how these new technologies are changing the way the power grid is created and operated, and really what's working now and what's not working in terms of big utilities, non-traditional energy companies, and startups alike. And Nick, let's start with you.
Okay, great.
So, AEP is this huge electricity generating company. You guys have what, let's see, 31 gigawatts of generating? 32 gigawatts of generating capacity. Coal accounts for 60% today, but it's going down to 45 in a couple of years. Right. Natural gas is at 23%. They've got about 3 gigawatts of clean energy, building 400 megawatts of solar, 500 megawatts of wind. How do you think about these new technologies? What is driving this kind of transition for AEP now?
Yeah, I think it's a fascinating time in our industry. We used to have 40,000 megawatts of generation, and we retired 7,500 megawatts of coal-fired generation. And as we make that advancement, it's clear that technology is changing dramatically. The investments that need to be made are changing dramatically. Our customers are expecting clean energy solutions. And as we focus on clean power plant objectives, which I know, clean power plants in the state, well, who cares? We got to continue on with the process. That continues to occur in our industry, and there's no question that as we make decisions on the future, it's not only the resources themselves that are changing, whether it's solar, wind, renewables, energy efficiency, demand-side management, all those types of things are driving optimization and efficiency out of the grid. And it gives us the ability to focus on those resources of the future, but at the same time, focus on the technologies that address many of the interoperability aspects of being able to deliver those resources. And so we're working more today on those aspects of our business, and we think of it in terms of infrastructure development and the customer experience. If you talked to us before, 10 years ago, it was generation, transmission, distribution. We generate, we transport, we deliver the product, and the customer just gets what they get. But today, customers are choosing differently as well, and we've got to have the technological innovation and the resources to accommodate that, and that's what we're doing.
How much of it is market-driven versus regulatory-driven? I mean, are these low-cost technologies, super cheap lithium-ion batteries, cheap solar panels? Is that a large factor in these?
Oh, I think it's both, but certainly from the market perspective, our company has been around 110 years. And we plan on being around another 110 years. And to stay relevant from that perspective, you really have to focus on where technology is moving in the future. So when you think about a large central station generation facility, you're making a 30, 40, 50, 60, 80-year investment. And today's technology and the way it's moving and the way it's being addressed, it'd be difficult to make those kinds of investments. So we want to make sure, from an investor standpoint, that we're making investments that move technology forward, enable us to have a closer relationship with our customers, regardless of what from the environmental regulations or those types of things may dictate. Because obviously we spend a lot of time in Washington focused on the outcome associated with some of these environmental regulations, but it really is centered on the fact of moving beyond bench type, what's being analyzed from an analytical standpoint, laboratory standpoint, as opposed to being ready, willing, and able, and also being able to deploy in a mass scale to employees so they see the environmental benefit. That's the key in terms of timing to move that process forward, and we're doing a pretty good job of doing that.
Susan, how does Advanced Microgrid Solution play with a company like AEP? And tell them a little bit about what you guys do.
Well, Advanced Microgrid Solutions is a development company. So we take new technologies like battery storage and we design projects that are demand-side management, but they're grid-facing. So we design projects that have a utility-facing functionality, which is really critical to how you bring a new technology to market. We're not bringing new technology to market. We're bringing the market to the technology. That means we have to be able to find utilities like Nick's that have a forward-looking view of how to use new technologies in their distribution system And then you can use the technology for optimization and efficiency. Those were the key words that I heard Nick say. So it's really about how do you use new technologies like energy storage to be the grid resource that is cost effective for them.
Okay. In terms of Google, how are you working with utilities? I know Google's invested over $2 billion in clean energy, some of it to generate energy for data centers, but some not. How is Google embracing working with utilities in terms of energy?
Yeah, first, maybe I'll separate some of the things we do at Google, and it'll help people get a little thrown by how we play in energy and where we don't. So we sign large PPAs for our data centers. We run a lot of internet traffic through there. It's a high growth business for us. So in that category, we've done about 2 gigawatts of power purchase agreements. All wind, solar, or zero carbon power through those. Some through utilities and with utilities, and others have been direct. So we do that in various ways depending on the regulatory regime or how we're playing in that region. Another category is the investment piece, which you mentioned, Katie, which is we've done about $2.5 billion of investment into projects. We're not off-takers for those projects. So in those projects, we invest in solar, wind, worldwide. We just did some in Africa. We did the largest wind farm in sub-Saharan Africa at 300 megawatts with Vestas. We've done a 90 megawatt PV project there. We've done a lot in the US as well. So we try to just deploy our capital in ways that are going to ideally be projects that are a little more complicated than others might like to take on. We don't generally do the easy projects. We do the ones that require a little more work and understanding. And then we've got technology that touches energy all through Google. So Nest, and inside Google X, we have R&D, and we've got even just the mapping and search functions have a lot of places where we work with even utilities on how they use maps to look at their infrastructure. So those are kind of the 3 ways we tend to interface. The biggest one, though, is as a user to make sure we're fully decarbonized and working with the utilities in ways where we can cite and make sure it's zero carbon deployments.
And Google's taking a little bit of a different stance from other companies like, say, an Apple, who's built their own solar plants. Google has kind of more embraced we'll leave it to the utility, we'll buy the power from the utility, that type of thing, right?
No, we did the first, it was quaint now, it was the biggest at the time. It was like a 2 megawatt deployment of rooftop solar to power our campuses. And it was the biggest in the world, I believe, in 2005 or whenever it happened. And now it's just modest and very small. But no, we'll do our own as well, but the big data centers will do what most of the others do and buy it from large wind farms and large solar farms.
Don't underestimate the power of a very, very large customer in influencing how a utility operates. I mean, that's not a passive engagement, leaving it to the utilities. They actually are, that's a huge impact.
Yeah, I'd say we're particularly proud of one thing we did in North Carolina where we actually changed the tariff structure. And now everybody can follow us and benefit from green tariffs and purchase and procure green power, and that took a lot of work. But now it's not just for us. Now everybody else can come in and do that.
So he brings up an interesting point, though, and that is, we do regular meetings, and obviously the industry does as well with national accounts, large national accounts, but we also with individual customers, whether they're whether they're Air Force bases or universities or whatever, and large customers have an expectation of what they want to see in the future and what resources are used, how they're utilized, and that kind of thing. It's interesting for our business, we have to make sure that the regulator is moving quickly enough for us to be able to do what the customer is expecting. And many times it's coming to the point where we have to partner with our customers to go into the regulator and say, this is what needs to be done. Whether it's microgrids, whether it's renewables, because many of them want to have, everything from generation, normal generation, whether it's natural gas fired or renewable generation or both. And we have to make sure that we're able to work with the regulator to get the tariff structure, whether they're tariff structures, which tariff structures take a long time to put in place from a regulatory standpoint. I like to think of it in terms of, it'd be great if we had the flexibility within tariffs to have payment plans or whatever you want to call it, so that we can be much more responsive as opposed to going and having to file something with the commission. I'll give you a perfect example. There's a small town in Texas that it's Paint Rock, Texas. Now it's a small town, but they've outgrown their capacity because they've had load growth and they have an expectation to raise that load growth. And so the actual solution that was best for us was with the company that we worked with called Greensmith. We invested in the company actually, and it's a platform, an energy storage platform technology that focuses on the utilization of batteries to not only improve the life of batteries, but the efficiency around that. That was actually the best solution, better than transmission, better than generation. But we have to file with the Texas Commission to get approval for us to work with the customer to do that. And that's just, it's not doable in today's environment. That has to change dramatically so that we can have that kind of relationship with our customers. Most people think that it's either disaggregation or disintermediation, whatever you want to call it. It's really, to me, it's more convolution, because it's becoming much more convoluted in terms of what the resources are, how they're applied to the customer, and also the interoperability with the grid itself. And that's something we really need to focus on to provide mass ability to take advantage of these types of resources.
So, are you saying regulation is kind of a bigger barrier for AEP than anything else? You want AEP to move faster?
Yeah, I think the regulation side of clearly needs to move faster. There's no question about it, or provide more flexibility. And you see, I happen to disagree with some of the models in New York and California where it's more focused on a distribution system operator that's disaggregated from the customer. In Texas, the ERCOT portion of Texas, it's that way as well. I disagree with those models because the technology itself is breaking down the barriers between the system itself and the energy grid in relation to what the customer is expecting, and we've got to be able to bridge that gap.
I think that's really, really key. The issue is flexibility. Most utilities are wholly owned subsidiaries of the regulatory bodies. They can't buy a utility pole without being told what to spend on it and the depreciation schedule, et cetera. But in Southern California is ground zero for the changing grid, and the regulators gave Southern California Edison an enormous amount of flexibility to figure out how to solve this problem. So we went in to Southern California Edison with their largest commercial building owner customer and said, we want to build the first fleet of hybrid electric buildings in the world, something that had never been done, and use it as a capacity resource for the utility. That's how that's how Southern California Edison ended up doing this groundbreaking grid modernization project, because we partnered with their customer and we brought them something they had never seen before. Then the regulators then adopted what Southern California Edison put forth, and that's how we moved the needle on it.
Is Google interested in energy storage and energy storage projects?
Well, I mean, we're interested in where the system heads over time. So yes, storage is clearly going to be a part of it. Interestingly, though, if you look at the challenge, you don't want too much storage. You want the right amount strategically located. And so there's some bad outcomes where you do one-to-one mapping of generation and storage and add a lot of cost to the system. That's not a really smart way to do it. But if you actually look at the system, diversify your resources, have solar, wind, nuclear, whatever, hydro, get a broad diversified fleet, then you can minimize and strategically deploy. And that's a lot of what I think Susan's company is doing, from what I understand, is where do you see where it's really needed and put it on strategically? Because the grid, if you do it in this one-to-one mapping, you layer a lot of cost. It's like having a really sloppy supply chain where I'm storing something and just waiting for it to be used, rather than the first response should be, I'd rather get an electron from somewhere else. And the last thing you should do would be to store it. So, and why do we care? Because we care about two things. One is decarbonizing, the other is rates. So we want to decarbonize the power supply in the smartest way possible over time, and that's good for society. It's good for us, and we want to do it in a smart way.
From AEP's perspective, I mean, you've invested in Green Charge,
right?
But are there kind of larger energy storage projects that AEP is interested in, and how do you see energy storage as changing your grid?
Well, we were one of the first in the country to have sodium sulfide batteries, large-scale sodium sulfide batteries on our system, and mainly focused on either trying to solve a solution relative to load in a particular area, but you can do frequency management. You can do all kinds of things with these types of solutions. So certainly he's right. I mean, you really do have to focus on where is the right place on the energy grid that these kind of solutions make sense. it's going to become more broad in terms of its application as the future continues, where battery lives are longer, storage prices are less. It'll become more adaptable on a mass scale perspective. But right now, it's focused on individual solutions that make sense. And that really goes to whatever, if they're trying to avoid demand charges, for example, and drive efficiency out of the process. But it also could be around secure supply of energy. So those are the kinds of things that we have to focus on. There certainly are advancements that are being made, but we're still at the cutting edge of defining where smaller scale solutions can be adapted. The key issue is interoperability with the grid itself. And if you're going to really focus on universal access to these types of technologies, then we need to have the data solutions to be able to interface in a very positive way. And we're already starting to do that with big data analytics that weren't there before, where we can actually tell when a distribution transformer is going to fail before it fails. And if we do that, then that improves the quality of service, and people recognize the ability for the system to be able to have that interoperability with all different kinds of devices. So it's a work in progress.
When it comes to distributed solar, how does it play a role in all this? I mean, from AEP's perspective, I think you're much more interested in utility scale, centralized solar investments rather than distributed rooftop solar, but how does that play a role in this new grid?
We do rooftop solar. I mean, at Ohio State University, we've got rooftop solar there. I think rooftop solar, so we call rooftop solar private solar, and we call utility scale solar universal solar, okay? And it really gives a connotation that universal solar is accessible to everyone. So we look at large solar solutions, universal scale solar solutions, because they're half the cost of solar. They get the same environmental benefit. And if we're trying to achieve accessibility to universal access as opposed to a unique customer experience just for that customer, then we've got to advance that part of the process as well. So we really focus on making sure that, number one, we are investing in those types of technologies to advance the grid. They're also able to operate with the grid. The net metering issue always comes up in terms of how to deal with the fixed costs associated with the grid itself, because I haven't found anyone that disconnected from the grid yet. And you hear a lot about zero buildings, zero emission this and that. None of it's really zero emission if it's still connected to the grid. It's connected to the grid for a purpose. So we just need to all understand what that purpose is. Overall, we can reduce the environmental footprint across the board by making sure that we do have universal access and taking the capital that's deployed for universal scale solar, half the capital, same environmental benefit, operability with the energy grid itself to drive even more optimization. That's a win-win for everyone.
Well, I'm definitely going to have to invite you to my War on Solar luncheon panel next. I'm going to open it up to audience questions in just a second. But you were talking about data. How much smarter does the power grid have to be to accommodate some of the energy storage technologies or distributed solar energy?
Right now, it doesn't have to be a lot smarter in order to be able to solve some of the problems that Nick just mentioned. We're dealing with 4 major clients right now that have put in a whole bunch of solar, and if you don't size the solar properly, you can create massive voltage problems on your campus, big university campuses. That's one. Number 2, you have customers that are net metering. They've put on solar, and so at the middle of the day, their load drops and they're net metering their solar. At the end of the day, when the sun stops shining, their load shoots back to the grid, right? So not only are they is that very, very expensive, but that means that for every ton of carbon they think they're saving by taking solar off the grid, they're actually adding 1 or 2 tons of carbon, because he has to build a peaker plant in order to be ready for when their load shoots back to the grid. So the first level of smart is simply controlling your demand using energy storage, so it has both a salutary effect on your costs, but also, and on the environment, but also it allows the distribution planners to not have to build that extra redundant layer. That doesn't take a lot of smart, so that's just a smart deployment.
Let me put a little more pressure on Nick and the utilities on where the grid needs to be, because it's decent right now. It works well. It is an impressive machine, and I can't forecast a future without it. But it does need to get smarter. It needs to be more dynamic. It needs to have more bidirectional control. We need to have better demand response and better interaction. We've got the biggest connected battery in the world is the US building stock with a lot of thermal inertia in it. We don't use it. We don't manage it. And so until devices are IP addressable and networked and really used in a way that's more dynamic, we're not there yet. So I think Susan's right that you can do things today that are smart, but it can and should continue to improve. But the network is we're a network-focused company, and the concept of living without the network and being off on your own with your solar and your battery storage is, I think Alex yesterday said it was an intellectually lazy argument. You're not going to be like a cell phone, because a cell phone doesn't operate by itself. Cell phone is part of a network, and it's a function of how many other users are on that network that makes it more valuable. And so I think the network matters. The network needs to improve. It can get better, but it's absolutely key to have a dynamic network that enables, there are two things. There's a strategic discussion and a tactical discussion. The strategic piece should be how robust and dynamic can and should the network be, and what are the market signals on that network? It's not just energy, but it's capacity and reliability. Then the tactical piece is, now what do I build? What do I do? Where do you put storage? Where do you put all these pieces? But you need to solve that strategic piece first. And we got a good start, is the good news, but we've got a ways to go.
Your pressure is I think you probably gave us a gift to say it was decent, because there is a long way to go in terms of the accessibility of stored energy in this largest machine on Earth. And data analytics are a huge part of that, but also components that really focus on optimization of the grid on a real-time basis, whether it's integrated volt-var control or those kinds of applications. And you're just now getting to the point with the ability, you all deal with a lot of data at any particular time, and for the introduction of the partnerships that exist between technology providers and the utilities, I think can be a really, really strong catalyst for achieving these objectives much quicker than any other way. And to me, when I look at what you're talking about here, is if we're able to focus on the bidirectional flow of power and energy, and also the bidirectional flow of data to support the interoperability and efficiency of driving efficiency in that's going to be a huge, huge positive for the entire grid, and actually for the emission reductions in the U.S. and for the resiliency and reliability of the grid.
All right, I think we just have time for one very brief, concise question back there.
Hi, I'm Letha Tani with the World Resources Institute, and I'm the Director for Utility Innovation, so I really appreciate the panel. Just very briefly, you point to how powerful the large buyers are, Google and many others that we see in our work. What specifically do you think the other companies should be doing or could be doing to move this issue forward, both from the utility perspective and, John, from what would you like to see as Google?
Well, I'd love to just see more companies following the lead of the ones that are pushing for a decarbonized grid that's accounted for in an accurate way, where we really because it's not as simple as just saying maximize renewables. You've got to work on minimizing carbon, and they're slightly separate concepts. And I think everybody pushing for better accounting and really pushing on the carbon issue is going to be key. There's some companies that started sooner, but the more that join in, the better, because it's important that we keep pressure to move the system forward, because there is inertia in the system. The utilities and everybody does need pressure from the users, and from, we hear it from our customers, and we're just amplifying it as a commercial entity to the rest of the system.
I think a huge part of it is the regulatory aspects of this as well, because as we move forward, we have to be there as a partner with our regulators to make sure that the changes that we're making can be done very quickly. And 5 years ago, 10 years ago, when we were doing smart meters, we were introducing smart meters, and it was like issuing everybody with an iPhone with no apps. And today, you're seeing the advancements from technology providers occurring such that the apps exist, and we just need to make sure that we are able to utilize those apps today. and take those to the regulators and say, this is what customers want. So we have a lot of work to do there.
The technology
gotta wrap it
exists. The technology exists. We need the flexibility to be able to implement them.
All right, unfortunately, we're all out of time, but thank you so much, John, Susan, and Nick, and I'm sure they'll be around. You can find them after the discussion.
Thank you.
The discussion.
Thank you.
The discussion.
Thank you.